Today I decided to give you guys a review of Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D. I've already reviewed the first two films in this franchise, but this is the first one that really takes on the formula that people know the series for to a large degree. It's the first one where Jason actually has his hockey mask. It's a lot less serious than the first two, and it's kind of just a campy good time. It's not one of my more favorite ones of the original 8, but I do rather enjoy this movie. As without further ado, I decided to give you guys my review of this classic horror film. The film picks up right after the events of Friday the 13th Part 2. Even though the ending of Part 2 seemed to be something of a dream, this one kind of treats it like it actually happened. And Jason is recovering from the wound got at the end of the film when he had a machete lodged into his shoulder. He gets a new set of clothes, and his new killing spree begins once again. This time around, his main targets of this group who are hanging out for a fun weekend at Higgins Haven, which is a farmhouse located on Crystal Lake. The new group of characters this time around consists of this girl named Chris, as well as her boyfriend Rick. There's also this really funny character named Shelly, who's more or less just a funny jokester, and is the one that inadvertently gives Jason Voorhees his mask. There's also a group of bikers this time around that Shelly accidentally has a run-in with, and Jason ends up taking them out as well. That's the essential group of victims this time around. And essentially, it's what you know from the first two films. A group of young kids go to a location at Crystal Lake and get wiped out one by one by the sinister Jason Voorhees. That's the basic plot of the movie. So now let's get into some positive. First and foremost, the soundtrack this time around is really good. They do use some of the Harry Manfredini theme, but it's more of a disco remix. And there's also just really good atmospheric music. And it just sounds great, and it just adds to the atmosphere of the film. Another great positive of the film is that it doesn't take itself as serious as the first two, which I kind of like. It's a goofy and ultimately silly slasher, but not to the degree of, like, say, Part 5 or even Part 8. But it doesn't take itself too seriously, and that leads to a really fun entry. Another positive of the film has to be the 3D effects. A lot of films stray away from 3D effects and just use them for certain moments, but this film goes all out. Everything from fake snakes to eyeballs, gore, everything you can imagine just comes out of the screen. Even spear guns get shot right at the screen. And it's just really great and adds to the fun nature of this film. Another positive this time around is Jason himself. This is the best we've seen Jason thus far in the franchise, and he's played this time around by Richard Brooker. Brooker does a great job in the role, and it's the first time we see Jason with a hockey mask, which is really awesome too, and another positive of this film. He plays him in a very brute-like manner. He's fast, he's ruthless, and he's out to kill. It's the first time that I think Jason actually has something of an identity of his own. He kind of just felt like a generic slasher in 2 and wasn't really even in 1. So it's kind of great to see him become the hockey mask wielding psychopath that we all know and love. And lastly, I do enjoy the characters this time around. Characters such as Chris and Rick are a bit standard, but then you have characters like Shelly, who's actually really funny and adds great humor to the film. And you also have characters such as Chuck and Chili, which are funny stoners in the movie, who get wiped out in hilarious fashion. But the film is not perfect, and I think I'll move on to some of the mixed aspects next. And one of those would have to be the plot line that Jason may have assaulted the main character when she was younger. The flashback sequence that takes place like a year before the movie, and the main character is in the woods, and in a pretty shocking and scary scene, Jason attacks her. But she wakes up essentially unharmed. You could argue whether that really happened, but it's implied, and I never did care for that. It just seems to be an unnecessary addition to tie the main character to the villain, which just is unnecessary in this kind of film. Another thing I didn't really care for is a lot of the plot threads from 2, such as what happened to the previous characters and how Jason looks completely different and things like that is just kind of brushed away, and it just feels almost like a standalone sequel at times. Apart from that, though, the only really negative I could say to the film is that it's a little bit redundant this time around. Although I do like Part 3, you really know what's going to happen, and there's no real surprises here. But apart from that, it's still a very fun and enjoyable slasher flick. I don't think it's quite as good as the first two films, but I do think they were trying something new with the 3D aspect, and I think ultimately it makes for a fun and really inventive sequel, and one that I think is a bit underrated. At a budget of only $2 million, the film pulled in over $36 million at the box office, which was big numbers back then, and proved this franchise was here to stay. Steve Miner would return to direct this film, and he does a really good job once again behind the camera. I don't like it quite as much as the second film, but I do think he did a very good job this time around. and this is one of the more fun entries into the franchise. I'm going to have to give Friday the 13th Part 3 a 7 out of 10. It's almost an 8, but some of the goofy aspects do hold it back some, even though I do like that, and I think that the continuity is a little wonky. All in all, I do recommend this film, and I think it's a very good entry into the Friday the 13th franchise, and one that anyone who's a fan of fun horror slashers is going to enjoy. Check it out, and have a good time. Peace out.